All right, check the mic. Instant reaction. We just heard the news here on a Friday afternoon. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has been fired as the general manager of the Minnesota Vikings. A surprise to us, Sam. I know there had been rumblings of not necessarily a firing, but maybe some disagreements inside the building with Kevin O'Connell, with Kwesi, the way the team has been built. We just saw Kwesi down at the Senior Bowl. So that part, surprising as far as timing,
Yeah.
and the fact that we're a month into the offseason here, and it's just going down.
So that's the part that's surprising. Like, it's the fact that I just had a chat with the guy like 2 or 3 days ago at the Senior Bowl on the sideline. It's very strange, I think, for a GM to have been allowed sent to the Senior Bowl, do business as usual, like weeks into the offseason for most teams. Obviously, the couple still playing. And then like get home to a pink slip, right? Get home like, okay, that's great. Now, bye-bye. If they had fired him coming out of the season, given how this year went, I think that would have made a lot of sense to people, not just because, Minnesota underachieved relatively, but because of how bad the optics were, right? Minnesota underachieved. The quarterback they hitched their wagon to looks not great, or at least looked not great for most of the year. Meanwhile, the guy they had in the building last year is on his way to a Super Bowl. Like if that had been what had happened coming out of the year, then I think that would have made a lot of sense. Doing it now is a little bit curious. All right. And honestly, the way billionaires operate, the way owners work, you wonder just how much trash talking Ziggy Wolf was getting in his DMs and his texts. Like, is the fact that Darnold made the Super Bowl actually a serious factor in this?
Let's start with that, because that's the optics, as you said. That's the one that may have been part of the reason, right? I mean, the fact that they moved on from Sam Darnold last year. He has as good, if not a better season this year with Seattle, but certainly a better, team results going to the Super Bowl. And so the fact that was the offseason debate, no matter how they came to that conclusion. And I think if you're on the outside looking in, given the firing here, you could easily say, well, maybe KOC went to bat for Sam Darnold and said, bring him back. Maybe Kevin O'Connell, wanted him back as the starting quarterback. And I think that's generally how the league or coaches tend to think. Remember, we were having conversations with people last year in the Super Bowl that were saying, well, what if the Titans really wanted Sam Darnold? Or basically Sam Darnold was so good last year overall that anyone who needed a quarterback should have thought about bringing him in as a free agent, or in the Vikings case, re-signing him. And a lot of coaches or former quarterbacks think like that. Like, this dude just played a great season. You want him. Whereas the front office might think more long-term, think about the financial aspect and what is freed up by not having Sam Darnold. So optics-wise, I think that is what it feels like here, where it's a season that they said, hey, we're gonna go to the rookie, stick to the plan, rookie contract quarterback, despite maybe the coaches were saying, hey, we know what we have in Sam Darnold. We could continue to progress here. Like, let's just pay him.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is the tough dynamic, right, between sort of process versus results. The results have been bad, right? Now the question becomes internally, was the process sound and we just got unlucky with these results, or was the process bad and that's what led to the bad results? So I think because of the results, because it's been so bad in terms of both sides of that equation have been a catastrophe, right? The Darnold versus McCarthy thing going into last offseason, there's two different sides to that. There's number one, what is Darnold going to be in 2025 based off how 2024 ended? That, I think, was an unknown quantity. And then number two, what do we have in JJ McCarthy, this rookie quarterback that lost his entire rookie season due to a knee injury? Is he going to be good? Now, so far, both sides of that went against the Vikings. Darnold backed up, if not improved on the year that he had in Minnesota, and JJ McCarthy was bad for most of the year and may not be a starting quarterback long term. So, like, both sides of that equation have gone against them. Could they have known that this time last year? That's the thing, right? I think there's going to be so much sort of revisionist history looking back because, of course, Darnold was going to be good. Remember how last season ended, right? It was a complete and total disaster. He went all the way back to seeing ghost New York Jets, Sam Darnold meme guy, right? And it was no sure thing that this was going to be completely forgotten about. That was just a blip. Cross it off, doesn't really count. He'll get right back on the horse and just continue trucking like a Pro Bowl, all-pro type of quarterback. that would have been a huge gamble for them to go, look, even though it ended in 2 straight catastrophes, we're going to re-sign him. We're going to give him serious money. And that means we're not going to be able to invest in the offensive line. So the thing that happened to him at the end of the year, where the Rams in particular just absolutely destroyed that offensive line, that's going to be the baseline. Like, that's the line he's going to be working with going forward. So this is, I think, it's a difficult evaluation to reverse time, to rewind and go, okay, put yourself back a year ago. Could we have been seriously expected to know that it was going to go this way? And should we have gone the other way, even knowing that that means the offensive line would be bad?
Well, yeah, look at the moves that they made last year, because after letting Darnold walk, they spent all that money on Ryan Kelly at center,
Right.
Will Fries at guard. They spent a lot of money at defensive tackle with Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. And could those offensive line moves still been made with Darnold there, right? They had the benefit of having this rookie contract quarterback now where they could overspend, say, in the trenches as they did last offseason.
And the answer to that is almost certainly no, right?
Yeah.
Because they were up against it from a cap point of view last year. They're really up against it from a cap point of view this year. And that's probably part of this, dynamic as well. It's like, hey, look, we're not in a good cap situation right now, and the team needs some work. But those things, they're connected, but it's not necessarily, they're not two errors necessarily. It's like, we're in sort of like, we spend all the money to make the offensive line good to make sure that the quarterback was going to be good. Now, the offensive line wasn't good for half the year because half the guys were hurt and the quarterback wasn't. It's, again, like, everything has been bad for the last 18 months or so. It's all gone south for the Vikings overall from a roster construction standpoint. But I do think so. If you want to make the case for firing Kwesi, and I think there is a case to be made, right? Like, again, the results have been bad in a lot of this area. I would focus on the drafting and some other things. I'm not saying I would give him a pass for the last 12, 18 months, but I don't think that decision with quarterback was a slam dunk at all. I think you can easily defend that from a process standpoint and say, there's no way of knowing that this was going to happen. Both sides of this equation went against him, and the offensive line money they spent for half the year was basically pointless because all the guys were hurt. I think that part is kind of unlucky. I think if you really want to focus in on the failings, it's look at the drafting since he got there. Like, that's been a problem. They haven't got enough out of the draft. They haven't drafted enough, period. Like, they just haven't had enough draft picks, which you would have thought would be an area that a guy talked about as an analytics GM, in reality, a sort of finance GM. In either case, the mantra there is to diversify your portfolio, take as many swings at bat as possible. And they haven't done that in the draft.
Yeah, I want to talk about the draft and then what they've done from a veteran standpoint. And then we don't really know. I'm gonna project a little bit here. We don't always know the inner workings. We talk about this all the time. Like, the GM gets all the credit or blame for all the players who come in, but we don't know the dynamic where how much power the coach has. We've been hearing more and more about Brian Flores, defensive coordinator, might have some personnel control. So here's my read on it. 2022 was his first draft. They drafted 10 times. The first 2 picks, Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, they go coverage players, right? They go back 7, secondary. Neither guy hit. Lewis Seen, unfortunate injuries. Ed Ingram with another second-round pick felt like a bit of a stretch at guard, but no starters coming out of that draft, right? You got like a Jalen Naylor, who was a pretty nice, 6th-round complimentary receiver. But then after that, again, we called him like an analytics GM. He's got this finance background. We think he would do things more analytically. Things reverted back, changed in 2023. If you were to sum up, I think, the tenure, 22 through 25 for Kwesi, I think the Vikings did an excellent job of adding veterans, adding NFL talent. Guys, TJ Hawkinson in a trade, Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, those edge rushers. I think they did a really good job adding veterans. They did a poor job through the draft, as you mentioned, and that was twofold, right? They had to sacrifice picks to get guys like TJ Hawkinson, but they also missed 6 picks in 2023. They did have 7 in 24 and just 5 last season. And of all those picks, Jordan Addison's probably the best player that they drafted. He's got the off-field concerns. Mekhi Blackman was a good pick in 2023. He's not even with the team anymore. J.J. McCarthy in the first round. Jury's still out on him at quarterback. Dallas Turner. I know some Vikings fans are like, well, look at his stats. Look at Jared Verse's stats. They're not the same player. Turner might be on the ascent, but he's not as good as Jared Verse, who went later. So Turner, still TBD. Last year, Donovan Jackson. So between Jackson and Turner, they might have two good starters for the long term, or two reasonable starters, with Addison almost certainly not going to get a long-term contract with some of the off-field questions. And then JJ McCarthy, of course, at quarterback, we just don't know. So that's the last three drafts: low volume, low hit rate. In the 22 draft, high volume, low hit rate. It's just a low hit rate across the board, 4 straight drafts here.
It's low, yeah, low hit rate. And somebody points out in the chat there, Will Reichert, the kicker, they did that. They drafted a good kicker, but they drafted him in the 6th round. So, even that is like a lot of resources to spend on a specialist. Good kickers can be had as undrafted free agents. It is interesting. Like it's not been a good drafting record. And then the other thing is every big swing they've taken has worked out against them. Again, like that can happen with good process, right? You can simply get the crappy end of the variance over a handful of picks, but it's really hard to keep your job when that happens, right? Like it's just the nature of this business. It is a results oriented business. And even if you've had good process, if you end up getting the bad end of that for a bunch of shots in a row, it's just really hard to survive. Like owners, whoever, GMs, they don't let you get beyond that. Like it's not an acceptable answer that we just got unlucky, right? And I get that to a degree. To a certain extent, it probably should be, but at some point, you can't answer to the misses with we've just been unlucky again.
And so all the reporting coming out of Minnesota was that there was tension for a couple of years now. Tension, rumors that Flores has a little bit more personnel control. I think you can almost see some of the stuff happening with O'Connell on the offensive side of the ball and Kwesi. And again, I think the pivot in 2023 to be more veteran heavy, right? Where the Vikings forever, we talked about the last few years of Rick Spielman, they were a high volume drafting team, but they always just kind of landed as a fringe playoff team. High volume drafting, landed as a fringe playoff team. We were wondering, are they going to continue down that path, which you would expect a more, data centric GM would say, okay, we're going to draft 45 times in the next 3 years. We're going to, whatever, 30 to 40 times in 3 years. But they didn't, and they reverted back. So now they're at this point. I know you could look at cap space and say, well, they're second lowest available cap space, negative 50 million or whatever it is. All that stuff can get reset.
Yeah.
But now they are at a point where there's less flexibility from a veteran perspective. And usually when you go low volume drafting plus low hit rate, that affects you 2 and 3 years later. And that's where we are right now, where the Vikings have probably less of a young nucleus than most other teams. Again, QB aside, right? The QB decision is always this binary. You either hit it or you missed. It's either really good for you or it's like you're coming back to do it again. We don't really know with Minnesota. Right now, it's more in like we might need to reset at quarterback. It's closer to that than it is we feel good about it. But QB aside, fewer young nucleus type of players. Veterans, a year older. So like that worked for a period of time. And honestly, I thought they had a good roster last year that got upset by poor quarterback play. So here we are. I do wonder how much of it's Darnold. I wonder how much of it's just the drafting. And you could say, well, O'Connell and Flores have more say in some of the veteran picks. We don't need Kwesi, right? They handled the NFL side. So I don't know that exactly, but my theory is they handled a little bit more of the veteran moves. That was more their move. Kwesi's handling more of the draft. And if that's the case, then Kwesi and his staff certainly have not done well from a drafting perspective.
It is going to be interesting to see, who replaces him? Because one of the other curious element about this timing, number one, you're deep into the offseason. The man was just at the Senior Bowl. Whoever comes in is going to be operating largely with, Kwesi's staff, Kwesi's board, all those kinds of things. Like they're not really going to get to do their part of it until next offseason. As you say, unless that sort of swings some power in the direction of guys like Kevin O'Connell, et cetera. But the other thing is like a lot of the candidates are gone, right? You've allowed other people that were hiring GMs several weeks to go through the process and bring in their guys. Now, look, Ian Cunningham was just
There was
hired
only two,
yesterday, right?
though. There was only two real GM openings.
Right, but
So
you've
that's
like
different
given
this year.
everybody else multiple week head starts to do this. Like if you wanted to hire, like there's a reason people fire these guys ASAP, right? Coming out of the season, it's because you get to be first in the queue to hire anybody you want. If you wait several weeks, people have been hired away.
Yeah, it was a big offseason for head coach changes, but GM wise, it was really just Miami and Atlanta. And if you want to add, the president of operations, Matt Ryan role. So really, there's only those two, and they both got NFC North guys, ironically, Packers and Ian Cunningham from the Bears. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think next year, I assumed next year would have a lot more GM turnover. Yeah, I'll throw my name out there for next year. I thought next year would have a lot more turnover, with this year being the head coach turnover. But yeah, the timing of this is curious. Now we've got a bunch of insiders now, saying we saw this coming. We knew. Well, you should have reported it if you knew. Oh yeah, we knew this all along. And I know that there were rumblings and it wasn't set in stone, but there's also reports within the building. This is a surprise given the timing. Had this happened, right? If this had happened right after the season, like you said, maybe it makes sense. Into also, like we're post All-Star games now. They've done their All-Star game prep. Kwesi was just sitting there on the sideline in a Vikings cap with us this weekend or whatever. The timing of it is curious for sure.
You can't all the crap that insiders put out in terms of like anything that's fed their way via text, like let's just fire it out. Let's not bother fact checking. We're pure propaganda pieces at this point. You cannot possibly come out now and be like, this isn't a surprise to anybody in the know. Unless you have a tweet, I need receipts. You need to show me that tweet needs to be accompanied with another tweet that you made a couple of weeks ago that says, hey, keep an eye out for Kwesi in Minnesota. This might be on the way out. If you don't have that, you cannot possibly be tweeting now being like, well, this isn't a shock to me or anybody else that's in the know. Get out of here with that crap. Like, shut up.
I gotta stay on the good side of the insiders if I want to get my name out there as a GM candidate. I don't know where they go from here, Sam. I don't know if it's it could just be for this cycle. So the way GM stuff usually works when we talk about the draft cycle starts last May. This cycle started months ago. So you have all of the scouts spend all off season. During the season, they put their grades together. They're putting the board together as a team. And then it leads all the way up to the draft. Then if you want to make a change, you change scouts, you fire scouts, you get new people in there. So like a new GM who starts tomorrow, say, it's not like they come in with all their brand new ideas. That's why year one for a general manager at this time, it's usually like, you didn't really have your full process. You only had a third of your process in there and you just do what you can. So I wonder how much they just promote from within, becomes a collaborative effort. And then, next guy gets hired coming out of this, or you hire somebody and they bring in their stuff. James Lipford was just the finalist for the Falcons job. Do you try to go to the next GM candidate, get them in here and really clean house? Or do Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores have enough sway right now? Demetrius is one of the AGMs there. Who's the old Colts? Ryan Grigson takes over as interim GM. They finish this out. It's a collaborative effort. Then they figure it out. That's certainly given the timing here, a guy like Grigson maybe makes sense to just take over internally.
I think, well, that depends on how anticipated or otherwise this was inside, right? Like if this is actually a move that's taken pretty much everybody by surprise, then they're not prepared to. I mean, the draft is, only a few months away. Like you're not really prepared to run a draft with a new guy. Like the organization has not been gearing up for a new person for the last several weeks. So you're therefore, by definition, you're several weeks behind the curve. If that's the case, I would imagine you try and like cobble this together with an interim somebody, get through the draft, and then go and look for the next guy. If the insiders are true, if they're telling the truth, and actually this has been anticipated for a while, and the whole building behind Kwesi's back or otherwise has actually been gearing up for his replacement, then maybe they are equipped to just find the next guy and install him, and they're good to go because they've been planning this for a while. My default assumption is that's not the case. I don't think you send the dude down to the Senior Bowl business as usual if the whole thing has been planned for weeks. So I don't buy that at all.
Yeah, and there's a difference between planned for weeks and there had been issues. I've been
Right.
hearing about, not to be all insider, but like for 2 years, you've been hearing some level of there's a disconnect, there's a
Yeah.
lack of
And look,
trust, there's miscommunications or lack of communication or power struggle, however you want to word it. It's like at least 2 years of that behind the scenes that we've been hearing. It just came to a head, obviously, here in late January.
right. And that doesn't just having that doesn't mean a guy's going to get fired. Like there's disconnect, there's tension,
Yeah.
there's people building this throughout the NFL. There are guys that don't get on necessarily or have some problems working with each other. That's just part and parcel of, work life. So those two things don't necessarily mean, like, just because there had been tension doesn't mean that Kwesi's been on the way out since the moment those reports have been surfacing and that the whole building is prepared for this to happen. Again, this feels like a late decision that somebody has made. Now, maybe the Darnold being in the Super Bowl thing is a significant factor in that, or maybe they just decided after the dust has settled and after a little bit more thought, maybe something else happened in the last couple of weeks where, tension escalated to like real problems. But, Kevin O'Connell is there. Brian Flores is coming back, right? They re-signed him as a defensive coordinator. The 2 jobs that he was being interviewed for head coach for, he didn't get it. So theoretically, he's back now as the defensive coordinator. So the coaching staff is intact. They have a really good cap guy, even though they're way over the cap right now. Rob Brzezinski's been there for years through multiple administrations in Minnesota and is widely regarded as a really good cap guy. And as you said, the roster's not bad. Like this roster's in pretty good shape, other than the fact that they might not have a quarterback. And so, and anybody new coming in, I don't think has this disaster of a situation to work with, right? You've got to get the cap back in order. You've got to make some tucking around the edges, and then you might have to go and find a quarterback at some point. But like, this is not a bad job to be taken over if you're a new candidate for the Minnesota Vikings GM.
Yeah, at high level for me, just to wrap it up, Sam, if to sum up the Kwesi era, my biggest surprise is that they spent so much or did their best work bringing in NFL players, current players, trades and free agency, and did such a poor job drafting or just a low volume job drafting. That would be my biggest takeaway from just the era 22 to 25. And the other interesting dynamic, most GMs come up through the scouting ranks, right? But as I like to always say here, your job isn't necessarily to be super scout, right? You're not just there because you're going to pick the best players. You're there because you have an entire team, including scouts, including people who've gone through the scouting ranks. And then you have to take all of that information, all of their grades, and then make a good decision. But in the scouting community, there's going to be a little chuckling, of course. Like you can't bring a finance guy, can't bring the analytics guy with no scouting background. That is significant, I think, as far as the landscape of the NFL, right? This baseball went through this too, right? Where like the scouts are moving up versus, the finance people and the nerds and the Harvard, the Ivy League grads. Eventually, the Ivy League grads started to take over in baseball, but this feels like for football, it's going to feel like a win for scouts. Like you're going to have some scout-centric people say, this is a win for us because, we can't elevate this somebody who didn't come through the system the way we did.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like it is potentially damaging for I hate using the sort of umbrella term of analytics, but from that sort of side of things. But the big takeaway from my perspective, looking back on, again, the Kwesi era, the Kwesi tenure, is how little it resembled what anybody would have expected an analytics GM to operate like. Like if you were saying, okay, this guy is going to get a GM job in the NFL. He's been to the PFF offices, right? He's been through the analytics side of things. He's got a finance background. What does this look like, right? If you wrote down 5 bullet points of things that guy would do as a GM, I don't think he did any of them. In fact, I think most of the things he did were the exact opposite of those 5 things. So in a funny way, that's my takeaway is this analytics GM tenure, however much of a misnomer that always was, has been anything but that. And yet it might actually be used to sort of beat analytics GM candidates with a stick going forward. Like, look, the last time we pitched it over to one of you guys, look what happened.
And that's where I don't know how much of it that was his actual plan how much the coaching staff was involved and how much just executing the plan as general manager is difficult. It's not as simple as just press some buttons and do what you want to do. The human element is the missing piece. You have to appease many, many people, including the coaching staff, including the scouting staff. You have to appease a lot of people. It's not as simple as just execute this on paper plan. I would like to think it should be, but it's not always the case. So I think that's just another interesting dynamic here where maybe that was part of the issue at the end of the day here for Kwesi in Minnesota. So bit of a surprise here on a Friday afternoon. We just got back from the Senior Bowl. Appreciate everybody who tuned in to our very professional content down in Mobile. We'll have our Super Bowl preview this Sunday night, Monday morning, and then we're off to the Super Bowl next week. So make sure you're subscribed and joining us for our trip to San Francisco next week. Thanks, everybody.